One, we are live.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to SC by SC's Regtech Partnerships, the Challenges and Benefits panel session. My name is Jeff Sandhu, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And if you have been tuning in our previous sessions, firstly, thank you for staying on. And secondly, you would have probably gained a lot of insight on the regtech industry here in Malaysia, and perhaps maybe even some ideas on how to move forwards. It currently has been talk of the town with a lot of technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, can enable companies from big data to smart data to gain insights into your own regulatory practices. They can even automate complex reporting, conduct meaningful analysis of critical compliance risk areas, and also broaden your coverage with much ease. But where would these applications come from? Is it through an in-house development or is it through a third party? You would have probably heard about the report done by SC earlier that showed that third-party providers are still predominantly your best approach. And so in this session, we'll be talking about partnerships. More importantly, what makes a good partnership, the barriers and the challenges around implementing RegTech solution. Firstly, though, to make this an engaging session, we need you and your questions. So this is actually a kind reminder that you can interact with us using Slido for this session. And to participate, all you will need to do is just open your internet browser and head over to sli.do. Enter the event code, which is SE by SE, and select the session, which is the RegTech Partnerships, the Challenges, and the Benefits. Drop in your questions here and feel free to vote for other questions as well. And we look forward to hearing for some of your questions and even maybe thoughts later on in our session. Now, let's introduce our esteemed panelists that we will, gather their insights, their knowledge, and their expertise for our topic of discussion, the RegTech Partnerships, the Challenges and Benefits. Firstly, let me introduce to you Yo Sin Yi. She's the Partner and Executive Director for KPMG Management and Risk Consulting. Sin Yi is a financial services advisor with specialist role in the financial risk management, compliance, and regulatory risk for financial services, and has worked with a range of clients across various sectors. And she leads the Fintech and digital banking projects and is currently involved in the regulatory technology work, co-creates solutions, and collaborates with technology providers to support clients' needs. Secondly, we have Stephen White. He's the Director of Sales Engineering APAC for Precisely. And Stephen has worked with the customers in the retail, telecommunications, financial services, and even the public sectors, specializing in the application of data governance, address management, spatial data enrichment, and location-based insights for different industry use cases. And last but not least, we've got Munira Khairuddin. She is the Chief Executive Officer at Principal Asset Management. And Munira has been the CEO and also the Executive Director for Principal Asset Management since 2013 and has been instrumental in helping the company to its assets under management, deepening its retail leadership with new focus in private retirement space, and maintaining consistent risk management and investment performance. In fact, she was also named as the CEO of the Year Malaysia in the Asia Asset Management's 2015 Best of the Best Awards for the second year in a row. And I'm your moderator, Jeff Sandhu. I've been a technologist over the last 14 years or so, where I've been spending time helping companies to adopt and grow in this digital era. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I think we can drive or dive straight into this quite, I guess, a topic that we've been talking about, I guess, from SC by SC. We've been doing this, I think this is the fourth session on RegTech now. And I want to actually start with Munira. Since we're talking about partnerships and its benefit and challenges, when did you actually, first start having a conversation about RegTech in your organization? And, perhaps you can give us an overview of just how much has that conversation changed now that, we're in 2021? Munira, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Jeff. Very happy, very pleased to be here today. Thank you, DSC, for inviting me to share some of our practical experience, right? We started our RegTech or FinTech journey, I think, at the end of 2017. and not that too long ago. But I remember in end of 2017 and 2018 being totally paranoid how late we have been, how late we were, right? So I think that paranoia of late digital adoption and with the tech deficit that we have really, drove the culture and the change in our company. So somewhere around 2018, right, we started actually with a business opportunity, right, and solving a customer issue, right. So the business opportunity, I remember there was two initiatives that we did. Number one was we have a very traditional agency force, and we wanted to give them, some basic tools so that they could do their EKYC and their onboarding, customers on the platform with the intent to double up their productivity. And then on the other hand, we also had this opening by EPF FMIS, where they were, onboarding how, companies like ourselves could offer our mutual funds or unit trust funds to EPF members, right? So if you read the SC survey, you will see that the early adopters or most of the Regtech that's come through is actually on AMLAR and EKYC, etc. So we were one of the early players in that. But I can tell you that how things have really evolved, because today it's not just about getting a basic vanilla platform and complying to regulators, right, or regulations, right. For us, it begins with the customer, right, and we can talk in a lot of depth on this. But I can tell you that today we've grown leaps and bounds, right? I remember, having a huge headache, right? Because we run a very traditional business. The model itself is very traditional. And then we were going to adopt this, total, front to back digital. And so literally we had to slice the company into two and say that, okay, I'm going to have a digital business operating model, cocooned and different to my traditional business model. I don't have the people. I have some money, but I don't have the people. Skills were really difficult to come by, but we'll start somewhere, right? So the traditional guys were helping the digital guys. But today, in the end, right, I think we are moving towards becoming a digital fund management company. And an important journey to that is the back end, because there's no point having a front end, pure digital, but at the back end, you're still struggling with all kinds of, infra issues, etc. So we spend significant amount of budget people to really fix the back end. And today, I think, I can tell you, and I'm really proud of it, the team's really proud of this. At the start of the year, we had something like 300,000 customers. Today, we're close to 2 million, right? Because of the work that we've done. And of course, the partnership with the e-wallet that we've come about with Touch and Go Digital has done fantastically well. But no way can a small company like ours, or a very traditional model, right, on servicing high net worth, etc., could have coped with managing 2 million mass market if we did not have, the infra. And of course, Regtech is central to it all because we're a licensed company, right? And it's been amazing. So I'll be happy to share more.
And I think we will try to dive deeper a little bit into your journey, right? And that transition that you had, because you mentioned it was very traditional and typically it's not easy to make that shift. And I find it interesting that in 2017, you were having conversation, you thought it was late into the game. But, 2017, I think in the Malaysian perspective of the Regtech space, it was probably, the early adopters as we look at the report, right? So I want to move on to Cindy, the financial institutions. They've been facing some regulatory burden over the last decade or so because, the technology and the birth of thousands of startups in the space and the cost of compliance as well has probably surged. What have you noticed that is really like the key driver in pushing Regtech into, what it is now, like a must-have conversation for today?
Right. Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everybody. So Jeff, to your question, yes, from our observations, what we've noticed is that well, regulators and regulations definitely played a role in driving the needs of Regtech in the past, and it's always been in those same areas of financial crime, in particular, right? But when we look at the direction that things are moving at this point, I think the conversation is starting to move further, and we're talking about, in addition to what we see as financial crime, cybersecurity, fraud detection. There are also things like the risk and compliance requirements, where analytics and the reporting needs are giving rise to more RegTech adoption. You can say that it's partly reg driven because regulators are asking for more information, and they're asking for financial institutions in particular to understand better what their positions are. But I would also say that the availability of technology has really made it possible for you to think about what are the other options that you have that can make things more efficient for you, and at the end of the day, it will also be more cost efficient. So why not, right? So a lot of these financial institutions are starting to have these conversations of technology in every conversation they have about implementing regulatory management or solutions for managing their regulations. Yeah.
Mm. And Stephen, Munira just now mentioned that now the conversation is not really just about EKYC anymore, right? Now with RegTech, there's automation in many business-wide control assessments. There's plenty of solutions in governance, risk, and compliance as well. So from your perspective, I guess how for those who are, I guess, beginning in this digital transformation journey, what should be their starting point? Because RegTech has seen a bit of a growth now.
Sure, and thanks, Jeff, and everyone. It's great to be here today. Pardon me. So, firstly, I guess in terms of governance, I think probably need to acknowledge that, like many major infrastructure projects, data governance needs to be undertaken as an enterprise level initiative. So, it kind of raises the same kind of funding challenges that an infrastructure project does, because data governance isn't generally classified as a revenue generating program. But quality powered data governance should have a significant impact on the bottom line. So, given the potential risks and inefficiencies caused by misinformation, quality powered data governance is an important investment. So, it can increase or it can yield increased productivity, ultimately decrease costs, drive innovation, and increase customer retention and cross sell. So, a little bit there to Zinyi's comments around, partly being reg driven, but the availability of this technology gives you other options to drive efficiencies and cost effectiveness. But in terms of starting points, I think there's probably a few key ways to ensure that a data governance and quality initiative will be successful. And probably one of the initial ones there would be leadership across the organization. So as an enterprise endeavor, data management initiatives really need to support goals across strategic, operational, and technical leadership teams. So you really need to bring all of them on the journey with you. And you need to build a solid foundation. So you want to establish a roadmap and an iterative plan that clarifies what the responsibilities are and properly sets expectations with regards to the goals that you have. And to help with that, you need to provide metrics for success. So you want to be clear about what constitutes measurable success. And to be honest, it's best to start with basic metrics. So, do we have an inventory of the terms governed? Do we have some high-level data quality statistics that we can have KPIs around? And you want to demonstrate success through short-term goals. So data governance is never really complete, but it does require adaptation to new conditions as time goes on. So it's important to be able to demonstrate to everyone participating in the effort that from senior sponsors to department level data consumers that you're having continued progress on this journey. And also to assist with that, you want to encourage communication. So the success of any major initiative is going to depend on constant communication to ensure that work is completed, your goals and objectives are understood, and stakeholders are informed of progress and responsibilities. And in order to give that additional capability and have it classified more along the lines of the potential for revenue generation, is to integrate data quality. So by making data quality an integral part of your data governance program, you encourage data utilization, you encourage confidence. So you have people being a lot more confident in terms of where the data is coming from, how up to date it is, what systems it's being used in, and what the impacts are. And you can improve the data value and mitigate compliance risks that you might face with poor quality data.
Well, you mentioned a few bits there about data quality. Perhaps you could give a very brief example, like, that data quality bit itself, right? Because that is a key to enable, like, any Regtech solution, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk about KYC, for example, data quality can feed quite a bit into that. When you're having to match either customer information or transactional information as it passes through systems, you can use quality processes to help measure that. So at the most basic level, it could be verification of email addresses or contact details and making sure they're consistent, fielded in the right place. But also, those quality rules that you put in place are driven by data governance. So you have, business level assets that determine, this is what we consider to be an email address. You have technical level assets that are related to that, and that could be in what systems that email address information is stored. And then the business applies certain quality rules and measurements that they want to have against those attributes to ensure that they're meeting intended targets for quality.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this, it's a kind reminder here that we need your questions. This is a session really for you to interact with our esteemed panelists here today. So remember, just go on to Slido, key in the tag, which is hashtag SCxSC, and join in the Regtech Partnerships panel session. And please, do put forward any questions that you may have to any of our panelists, and we will be happy to actually answer them. We've got, about 45 minutes left or so with our esteemed panelists. I want to just, for briefly, I want to move to Munira, because, Stephen mentioned about some of the I guess, the KPIs that, will need to be set beforehand. And Munira, you mentioned earlier on that, you started having this conversation in 2017, 2018. And then later on, actually, there were more investment where you actually made a huge investment into Regtech, right? So what was like the early on KPIs that you set for yourselves in order to ensure that, it's a continuous investment that you can go out throughout the years, and it will then be what it is now, right? That huge investment that you made forward. So, talk to us a little bit about that initial stage itself. You're on mute, Munira.
I'm always on mute. That's a really great question, right? Just like any other fintech, right? When you start something, you need to have a really, solid business case before asking for money, right? And investments. So it started with that. And I think that value proposition is really important. And that value proposition usually starts with what is the problem that we're trying to solve, right? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And if we can find the problem that we're trying to solve, and then the business opportunity, and then come the matrices to it, right? What is the measures of success, right? So for us, right, we're quite fortunate because Principal is a large global company, and there's a lot of experience and tech resource across the world, right? So I think, in the early days, we were really drawing a lot of experience on the infra side, from the US and India. So one of the things that, that we had to hunker down was, oh yeah, we want to go into this digital space, right? But what is the market segment that we're trying to get to? And so for us, it was mass market. And knowing that we needed to go to mass market, we need solutions that could help us, number one, on data governance, right? Stephen rightfully pointed out on the data. We got to build that data lake, the data warehouse, right? What kind of data warehouse are we looking at, right? And then the infra, like cloud, right? We were not on cloud. So we had to make a conscious decision that, half of the company was on cloud, another half wasn't, right? Because if we were to migrate everything from traditional to cloud, we will be late. And as I mentioned, we were paranoid that we were late, right? So we literally had to slice ourselves and say, okay, digital is going to go ahead, right? Everything in digital looks like brand new, okay? So we needed to have the infra in, and then the data governance to it, and the sponsorship. Now, I personally sponsor all our digital streams. It sounds a bit micro, but it needed to have that, executive sponsor. Because if you want to drive change in a traditional structure and how people think, we're not talking about running an IT team, right? We have left that running an IT team, head of IT, a long time ago. We're talking about running a digital company, right? It's more than IT, right? Data sits with business. Data sits with business. So what kind of governance and accountability or responsibility are we giving business on data, right? Customer experience is a key component to it, right? Because if you go into Regtech even further, right, we should be talking about social media listening. We should be talking about, a psychometric analysis. We should be talking about all that, right? And what we discovered early on, when we wanted to, look into the correlation between, fraud or governance issues to, some of those business cases, we didn't have enough data. And so the answer to that was, well, all of your findings were inconclusive because you know what? Your data points is just not enough. So the truth is, now that we have 2 million customers, I think that data is pretty rich. So you got to really think in a big picture, right? What are you after in your digital journey, right? If you're after getting market share and trying to put out a new solution, etc., really you probably need to think about how do you acquire customers, because there's no point talking about data when you don't have enough data points, and that's the things that we learned early on. I'm not an expert like Stephen, but those are some of the practical experience that we learned. And I just wanted to add, right, forget trying to do predictive analysis and all that when you haven't sorted out your infra. So I think infra is really, really important, right? Forget AI, forget all that if you don't have your infra in place. So I think, talking from my experience, I think for the capital markets in Malaysia, like fund management business, right, you're going to pay a lot of attention on the infra because, then you can leapfrog a lot.
I want to move on to Sydney because we've got a question which I guess it's a very good follow-up to what Munira mentioned early on. And Sydney, this is a question from an audience that we got here. How do we actually quantify the cost savings of implementing Regtech solutions? Because, I think, Munira also mentioned about, you got to set the KPIs, forehand, and, you got to build from that. And, data is sometimes, if you're starting small, it's a bit difficult. So how would one actually go about in, trying to, I guess, quantify the cost savings?
Consulting question. Yeah, good question. And I think that's very important to do, especially when, like Munira says, right, you have to put up a business case. You have to explain to your senior management, to the board, and your project sponsors on why you want to do it, how is it going to benefit the business, and most importantly, what's the dollar sign when you put it in, what's the return you're going to get. What you can actually do, I think this really straightforward answer is that what technology does a lot of times is solve your problems, right? You can always quantify this in terms of hours saved based on the FTEs you actually need to spend. So many times what we've noticed is that, let's say if I'm doing a project where it's going into moving from manual to digitization or manual to automations, you literally compare how many people it would take for you to run X number of functions and processes, move that into a solution or an automated process. How much savings do you get in terms of time and man hours, and boom, you get your number, right? So you could be reducing from 5 headcount to 1, and that 4 other headcount doesn't mean that you let the person go. Okay, so this is something that's very important, because there's this stigma about, when there's digitization or when there is we're moving up the value chain, then what happens to others? You just deploy them to other areas of work where there is more human interaction required, human analytics required, and that's where you start to upskill your people, right? When you have solutions run it for you, but you still need someone to make sense of the information and to put the information to good use, right? And people will be able to do that, right? We still have the brain power to do that, and we should. So long story short, right, the most direct way is to quantify the time spent and the effort spent. Obviously, you have to compare that to how much it will actually cost. The other thing, especially when it comes to Regtech, is if you look at the amount of fines that some companies have to go through, regulators do that, right? And it is a wake-up call, and you would much rather save that money in terms of regulatory fines and put it into your bank systems or your company systems, right? We're not talking about those fines not only those fines that actually make headline news. We're talking about when the supervisory bodies, they conduct their reviews, they may impose certain fines because they find that you don't have sufficient reporting, or because of this lack of controls in your systems, you have compromised on certain data quality and data privacy issues. It could come to that. It could be because of regulatory reporting. Your reporting was not accurate, and they could potentially impose fines based on line items, for example. So we have heard of jurisdictions that do that too. So if you put those kind of numbers in front of, into your business case, it does help to justify the story and the costs to your savings, if you can call it, right?
Jeff, can I jump in? I think that's a
Sure.
really good point, Zinni, right? I've actually real life experience, right? So we started RPA in robotic process automation in I think 2019. Okay, and so this is a regional number, but we have saved over 3,500 hours, and we've developed 24 use cases, right? It's not just about So the question was to quantify, right?
Yeah.
It's like really significant. And then on cloud, right? I mean, we have I think kind of like spearheaded or sped up our development time 3 times more. Had we not gone to cloud, it would have been like really slow to get time to market.
Mm.
Being on cloud allowed us to go 3 times more, right? And our computing bandwidth is just increased, right? And I told you about the partnership that we had, right? We didn't think we are going to get 2 million customers, right? A 1.7 million in 7 months. We didn't think about that. But thank God we had gone on cloud, because then we could cope with the bandwidth, right? And then on cybersecurity, right? If we don't pay attention to cloud and all this, right? Your pen testing, your vulnerability test, right? Is going to be quite difficult to do. So the fact that we have those infra in place, we do minimum once a year, minimum once or twice a year on vulnerability testing and pen testing.
And I guess, in a way, it's just kind of like leaving the baggages away. Right? Stephen, you wanted to add a couple of...
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jeff, the way that we look at it for some businesses is, in terms of quantifying that or qualifying it, you really want to try to align to the business level goals so that you can take that up to a strategic level. So, whilst we might talk about tactical level metrics or inputs to our processes, these could be things like cataloging assets, defining terms, developing quality rules. They're all very tactical, but what we want to do is relate those and align those to more strategic metrics that the business might use, such as full-time employee productivity, adoption, net promoter scores, cycle times, and data sharing. So, we try to be able to sort of tell a story that, by applying these tactical metrics, these lead to positive strategic value metrics. So if I can say that we've catalogued 10,000 supplier data assets, we've defined the top 50 critical supplier terms, we've aligned on key rules and policies for each, and our data quality is showing 90% plus accuracy and consistency across our supplier spend data, then as a result of that, that can lead to our supplier data setup process decreasing by 25%. We can identify our top 20 vendors, which makes it 33% faster for contract negotiations. And we've increased FTE productivity by 20% due to data self-service, because making it easier for people to get access to data, but we're also controlling that process through an approval workflow.
Yeah. We've got another question here, and I think this is probably for all, but maybe Sini, you want to take this from when it comes to fund and asset management business startup. How do we get relevant endorsements from the local authorities on Regtech?
The SC question, isn't it? I think for startups, for fund management and asset management companies, if you're talking about endorsements from regulators, well, we do have sufficient, I suppose, policies and requirements that our central bank as well as SC has, right? Obviously, you should be meeting those minimum requirements first. There are also SOX, for example, and the other technology requirements that there are global standards. I think if you're aiming for the stars, then it would be good to bring in accreditors or validators to do that. KPMG, what we are trying to work on is to help our startup community to achieve this, right? To provide some form of assurance or some form of a review to be done for startups and for tech companies, right? This is something that we're looking towards to support, definitely. And obviously, if we had some form of a mechanism to identify at what stage are you in compliant with, and how do you then further improve? That will definitely help the community. What we've identified is that many people don't know where to start, right? But I would say that the first point is obviously your regulatory, and then the global benchmarks and the global requirements from technology perspective. And you can seek the third parties support or advisors to provide you with that input, and you can call on us. We can do that, no problem.
Munir, I'm going to give you a heads up because we do have a lot of people voting for this question, but I'm going to try and save it towards the end because someone is asking you, as a practitioner, what is your wish list for the future of Regtech innovation? So keep that in mind. I will come back to your, answer in just a bit because I want to, continue on with Sydney in terms of like maybe giving us an example of a successful Regtech adoption. Because you mentioned about working with startups and many different kinds of businesses, right? Perhaps you can share like a story, a journey, and then Stephen, I'll come to you about maybe a story from your side as well. So Sydney.
Thanks. I think if we keep along the same thread, right, and we talk in terms of a startup or rather a smaller institution that wanted to adopt Regtech, right? Because we've talked about all large corporations having big budgets and how do they address Regtech? No problem, they've got big budgets and a lot of people to manage this. But what about the smaller companies, right? And one of the things that many people, including fund managers, right, linked to the question just now, fund managers and other financial institutions, they also have regulatory requirements. And if I can bring the example of regulatory reporting, this is something that financial institutions have to do a lot of, right? Whether it's financial reporting or operations reporting, lots to be shared with the regulators. So one of the things that I think was very good experience, and I wanted to share this because people often underestimate the amount of work that needs to be done, is that from having manual processes and having several people working on the regulatory reporting requirements, we actually worked with one of the solution vendors, and we mapped out all the regulatory reporting requirements of this institution. It's a small bank, but nevertheless, they still needed to maintain several headcounts just to do this, right? But by the end of it, they could run the regulatory report by one person, right? Several regulatory reports by one person once a month, and obviously this is on cloud, so there is that flexibility as well, and it just saved everybody a lot of time, right? But it was a very painful process at the beginning, right? Because you first have to go through data. Data is the main thing, right? You're linking your reporting requirements, templates and submissions to the data source. You have to make sure that the data you have in the first is good in the first place. So all the data governance topics that we talked about just now comes into play. You have to make sure your infrastructure is there and stable enough, right, in order for you to run this, because it would include not just a lot of templates, but you will want to use this for analytics later on as well. And just a lot of man hours to start off the project, right, and to do it the first time. But once that was done, you have plenty of savings in terms of man hours and accuracy. This also reduced the error rate, right, of your reporting, and that also helps to manage your regulatory submissions. So there are multifold benefits, right, when they adopted this, and I find that that is a very successful Regtech adoption in a rather small scale, because for regulatory reporting, you can go simple or small scale, but you can also do it for a very, very large GSIT, right? A huge bank, that's possible too. But what I wanted to demonstrate is that Regtech is applicable for all scales, right? So you can benefit from adopting Regtech no matter what the size is, even if you're a startup, right?
Yeah.
It's possible.
Stephen, from your side, I guess any successful conversations that you that pops into your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one that's probably a little bit specific is around Swift payments. So we've got a customer that's a Nordic banking group, a fairly large customer base, branches across Sweden and Baltic countries, and also US, China, countries like that. So they use the Swift payment system. They have to track their Swift formatted payments as they move through the clearing system in real time. And they've got to ensure that all of their transaction fields, payment formats and values are staying consistent and accurate throughout the transaction balancing process. Now, due to regulations, when processing errors occurs, they've got to be able to quickly locate and resolve them. Otherwise, they'll be subject to fines, right? So the problem they had was delayed payment processing on the SWIFT network was resulting in financial penalties. They had limited visibility into the SWIFT payment process, which made it difficult to identify and resolve errors. And some of the transactional data inaccuracies that were being found were contributing to those delayed responses, and they were negatively impacting their customer experience. So we put in place our Data 360 solution, which I talked about earlier on in a demonstration. And what that did for them was it improved their end-to-end process control and data quality throughout that payment process. It reduced their financial penalties because it limited their processing delays, and it also improved their auditability of error identification and correction, so they could sort of show within the payment flow lineage where they were making corrections to data and also identify where the problems were coming in. And because of that, the amount of automation that we were able to put into that process, it decreased their costs associated with that error detection and resolution, which also reduced their interest payments as a result of that delayed payment processing. The decrease in delayed payment processing. So a pretty specific one, but a fairly useful one as well.
Yeah. Munira, I've given you some time, I guess, to think about your wish list. Going back to the question from one of our audiences asking you as a practitioner, what is your wish list on the future Regtech innovation? I'm no genie to grant you your wishes, but I would love to hear what are some of the wish lists that you have.
I think, right, and I'm thinking as an industry, as a capital markets participant, not as a principal, right? Not from my company perspective. But I think one of the things that I've been quite consistent about is this data depository, right? And a data depository where, all of those national or regulatory requirements can be done at that data depository, right? So all your compliance checks, etc., so that can you imagine smaller fintech companies, right, will not have to spend the amount of just budget and time like what we have had to do, right? And instead, what it does is it drives the value up. So then, companies like ourselves will be monitoring things like transaction risk monitoring, right, and more investigative type of nature. Rather than the basic stuff, right? So you may be drawing it closer to home, right? Like the health ministry, right? KKM, right? Since all these COVID cases, right? They have fantastic data depository. And with that, they can do more, right? And inform the public about how we are doing, slice and of course more can be done, right? But the truth is something like that, right? Where then industry players like ourselves and many more out there can take a look, right, to drive this business case. We talked about, you need to come up with a business case, right? But we don't know what's the potential out there. There's nothing to go by, right? And the data that we have is maybe we'll go on Cerulli, and that's like so broad. So maybe a bit too vocal for SC, but the truth is we need more public information, right? Because with that, we can then look into, what is the potential growth in a certain segment? We don't have enough data maturity on a public scale. Forget by companies, right? Because those are, I think, probably like between 1 to 5 on average in Malaysia, probably like 1 or 2, right? So we're very nascent. But I think this is where, Regtech can really help us, right? Together we grow on our data maturity. Stephen is an expert in data, so I'm not going to, touch this area. But the truth is, from a practitioner point of view, we're very late. As a country, we're late on data maturity, and especially in the financial services. It's just not enough out there, right? For small firms to make decisions. Even for big firms like ourselves, we struggle, continue to struggle, right? And continue to be surprised, right? And then we're like, thank God we went on cloud for that one. If we didn't, I think our server would have busted. So things like that, right? We want to know, we want to drive our propensity models, but there's just not enough information out there. There you go.
Stephen, you want to, from your perspective, do you see that as being kind of like a challenge or a barrier per se for Regtech to even grow further? Stephen, you're on mute.
Sorry, are you talking about barrier to entry or?
Yeah, so like, in terms of, what Munira mentioned, like her wish list, right, is to have, that data lake per se, right? Is that something that you see also, as like a challenge for the Regtech players, or even, businesses who want to jump into the Regtech industry, be an adopter of it? Is that like one of like the barrier because of that, I guess, the information itself, right? It's a bit difficult.
Yeah, it's one of the things we hear. So, in terms of conversations we have with customers, something we hear quite often is we don't know where to start. We have so much data, so that I think that's kind of a little bit about what Manira is talking about. We don't have an approach for how we need to govern our data. We don't know how to measure what good data looks like. And one we also hear quite often is that the business rejected other tools because they were too technical. So I think business-driven governance and quality is quite important. We try to operate sort of a top-down, bottom-up, middle-out type approach where we can handle the strategic, the operational, and the tactical levels of the business and talk to each of those. So I think correctly figuring out how to align competing business initiatives, stakeholders, and use cases for the data can often be a barrier. Managing objectives of strategic teams like the C-suite, tactical teams like data and technology, and operational teams, that are impacted by day-to-day business operations is pretty key.
Sini, the Regtech space, I guess, has boomed a lot of new startups. So there's a lot of noise currently in this space, right? And it's getting quite crowded. If there are not thousands, there are hundreds of solutions or services in the market. So when it comes to partnerships, what would typically be an important aspect that one should consider? When they're talking about partnerships and stuff, because we've heard already some of the barriers here, and what would be that aspect from your perspective?
Well, we've seen many successful projects, and also many that they get implemented, or they get but they get stopped halfway, or some have been implemented but they don't use it properly. I think firstly there are the few things that we need to think about here, right? So the first thing is that we really need to understand what is that use case. What are you looking for, right? I know it sounds very theoretical, but I think Munira is nodding, right? And she's gone through this, right? You have to understand what do you want first. In the real world, and the practical reality is that you can't just start from a blank sheet. You have to first identify, okay, so this is the business, this is what our issues are, these are the things that we want to fix, or these are the ways that this is the next direction that we want to go, where do we want to be, and you design the process in between, right? Obviously, you need to then define your specific requirements, your functional requirements, and I think this is where a lot of people start to say like, how do I know what I don't know, right? Then talk to people, right? You can call people. That's why there are so many vendors and consultants out there, right? Use us, right? Talk to people. You will find more. You find out more the more conversations you have. You get those ideas out, and then you can identify, okay, actually I want this. I want to have these kind of features. I want to be in this state in 5 years' time, but at this point I don't need it there yet. So you choose based on that. There are also things like depending on your own company's culture, right? You have to really be honest with yourself. Do I have the internal capacity and the resources to do it? And I stress this: be honest, right? Because a lot of people think that no problem, it's a project that we can just take on. We allocate people, half the time, they can do this after 5 o'clock. That's not how it works. How many knows? It has to be full-time resources, right? You have to have proper project managers, proper change management people, and experts in-house, right? Or train the people to be full-time. Full-time people need to be trained to manage this in-house, because you not just need them for your development purposes and to make sure the project runs smoothly. There is a subsequent part of this, which is the maintenance part. And you don't want to be too reliant on your vendor because, or not just because of cost, because of speed to address problems, right? So you also want to be able to have some form of understanding, control, and to help you make the decisions as well as you continue to maintain this, right? I think these are the main ones. A very popular thing that I've experienced in the Malaysian landscape is that we still want many vendors to be physically on ground, even though we're talking about technology that you don't necessarily need to be there nowadays for specific types of deployment. But it is still a culture, I guess. And again, be honest, right? If I want this, then I need this, and that will ensure the success, right? So those are some of the things that I feel helps to navigate in adopting technology, and in particular RegTech.
Ladies and gentlemen, we do have a lot of questions coming in. Although some, I may not address all of them because we are talking about partnerships, right? So some of these questions are not really relatable to partnerships, but I'm sure SC will be very happy to somehow address them later on, during the SC by SC 2021 Fintech conference, right? So we will try to get to some of the ones that are more specific to partnerships. Following on I guess Sini is talking about the staff capabilities or the in-house training. Munira, I want to come back to your journey, right? Because we always hear about technology, it's not really just about the tech, right? It's actually a culture. It's the people. It's about the process of how you get things done. What did you do in-house internally as an organization to really unlock the value of Regtech? Because it feels like, as Zini mentioned, some they do adopt, but then they don't follow through. It comes down again to the people, right? How did you unlock this potential of Regtech in your organization through with the staff itself?
I think all that Zini mentioned really resonates very well with our journey. And I think the first thing, we have an ethos that we start first with the customer. We always start with the customer, right? And when we start with the customer, what is the problem that we were trying to solve? So we were trying to solve financial inclusivity. We were trying to solve how do we penetrate the mass market, right? To make investment accessible and affordable to all. So that was the main customer problem that we were trying to come into, right? Because with solving that problem comes, financial education, financial literacy, and then tech adoption, right? We have a very ripe demography for this, right? Because our tech adoption in Malaysia is actually very, very high. Yeah, our smartphone adoption and all that is very, very high. So there was an opportunity, there was a problem that we was trying to solve. And then of course looked at people. It can't just me with my thinking, right? So it had to come with somewhere, right? And I believe in infusing new skills and new talent into a traditional landscape. And so we did exactly that, right? I hired a few digital people, but totally different, no experience at all in asset management. And it's intentionally so. No experience in financial services, no experience in asset management, because we needed to see from their lens what customers were thinking about. So that's how we started. So I was thinking if I could invest, like 3 to 4 people first, plus me, trying to be cool, trying to be tech. I'm not at all. I'm very traditional in my background. And just with that 4 people or 5 people, right, they would then bring in 5 people each. Then you get to 25. 25 people will bring 5 more people each, right? And we're not a very big company. We have like 300-400 people. Okay, big for some. But then it infuses, right? So it becomes a catalyst. And so much so that, and I intentionally created so much hype about digital that, that FOMO kicks in. FOMO really kicks in, right? Because the CEO just wants to have conversation on digital. Anything not digital, okay, someone else sort it out. I will only talk to anyone who's got a digital solution surrounding it. So this driving of culture, right, and kind of like putting a carrot out there, because stick never works, right? Putting a carrot out there, and then we have lots of sharing sessions, right? And so to Zini's point, right, we didn't have this talent, so we did have to use partners or consultants or vendors who knew what they were doing. But over time, we learned that sorry to say Zini, but certain things, right, we probably know better than consultants because we've been there. Okay. So that is a great evolution process. And another thing I wanted to say is that we have found discovery workshops, really important, right? Before, and we tell our board this, right? I'm thinking about this kind of spend, but you know what? I'm going to spend this small amount to discover first, to test, survey, test, validate. Today, no business proposal comes to my desk if it's not validated by real customer insight. Nothing goes anywhere without validation. So that kind of culture, right? This discovery workshop, we have had some discovery workshops that we learned, oh my God, forget it. We're not going to do it. Did we spend money on this? Yeah, we did. So we've got consultants to go through these discovery workshops, right? Then we realized, oh my God, luckily we did this discovery workshop. If not, we would spend XX million on it. And it turned out to be that, oh, it's not what we wanted. So it's really important. Another culture is it's okay to make mistakes. We got to experiment. I think this experimental culture is absent in a lot of companies, traditional companies, right? Even in my company sometimes, right? Because it's always like, oh, why didn't you get it right? So it is almost like, trying to train our paradigm, right? Paradigm shift that, people need to fail, but we got to fail fast. People got to fail because if you don't fail, they're not going to learn. So we got to fail fast in innovation and then move on.
Yeah, that's very good. Munira, I can tell that you are very hip and trendy. You casually just dropped in FOMO in a sentence about Regtech, which, I, in the wildest dreams, I never thought that, I will actually hear a line like that. Stephen, I want to come to you and ask you a little bit about, what's next for like the Regtech space. And we've got like a question here that's also asking like, what is the role of like a regulator that can actually help like to grow the space for Regtech innovation as well?
Yeah, I think in terms of the role of a regulator, that's probably a tougher one for me to answer. What we try to do is have systems in place that help, our customers comply with the regulator, and regulators don't typically want to align to vendors. They for obvious different reasons. But in terms of what's next, and not necessarily next big thing, but where things are heading. Look, I think really it's about bringing it all together. So I think a lot of organizations are almost still in an information gathering stage. So they're starting to learn more and more about these technologies. They know what's out there in terms of, say, data quality. They know what's out there in terms of data governance. They understand regulatory policy and compliance. But, they really want to bring all that together because in a lot of organizations, quality and governance might be held separately and managed by different parts of the business, and compliance can be a different area altogether as well. And, it's okay and it's normal, but it probably should be recognized that there's a symbiotic relationship between governance and quality. So really you want to have a tool set that can be integrated, not just for governance, but for quality, and for reporting as well. So, I think bringing it all together and being able to integrate multiple systems as well is where things are heading.
Sini,
can I jump in, Jeff, on that? Just a quick one, right? And I'm not trying to suck up to SC or anything, right? The truth is, a digital journey needs to be paired with the regulators. It must be. So the moment we started our digital journey, we consulted the SC very, very early on. And our partner, TNGD, consulted Bank Negara very, very early on, even at the idea conceptualization stage. And then we grew together, learning and sharing that experience, what we're thinking about. And so this is crucial, right? Because as a country, we're all still learning. And so we need to start that journey very early on. So I just want to put it out there.
Yeah. Sydney, I want to come to you. We've looked at, I guess, the SC Regtech survey report, and, we've seen, about the increase in investments in Regtech, the growing space. But my question to you is more of like, what more can be done for this sector in order for us to have a different conversation next year if we were to, again, do a similar type of research or report on the Regtech space? What would you, on your perspective, that, can be done a lot more for the Malaysian market?
Thanks for the question, Jeff. And this is interesting because I think we've grown quite a bit from the past, right? Because from the report I can see is that while there is an interest to spend more effort and money investments into Regtech, important also is that there is an awareness, right, of the ranking. So I think the ranking is the compliance and risk management ranks as a priority, followed by AML CFT and followed by fraud. That's the top three. And there is a gap in terms of Regtech adoption, right? But I think the starting point is right. At this point, we've already come so far, but we now know that we want to address these areas. So what next, right? And this kind of links also to the question from the audience about what can the regulator do. So if you can see from an industry viewpoint and also a regulator viewpoint, there'll be two perspectives that we can look at, right? From the regulator's viewpoint, I think obviously, if we talk about public data, we talk about the appetite to have more discussions with the industry to explore together, which is not lacking in the Malaysia landscape. I think that's great. But having that sandbox to test, to validate, and to work together to build those solutions is definitely useful. To have more industry groups by regulators, so it's not just one big regulatory sandbox. If we can have more specific engagement between the industry players and the regulators and the other providers, infrastructure providers, for example, and solution providers, those kind of conversations need to have more, need to be more. I think innovation in Malaysia in general needs to improve, and that is also applicable to our Regtech industry. Otherwise, we will constantly be just doing, the regular horizon scanning, false positive pickups, and the typical things that you would see in the Regtech AML KYC, domain, right? We want to move out of that. And to move out of that, a lot of discussions need to be had where you bring out your pain points together with what are the potential discussions and what kind of parameters do you work with and within, what is the appetite for this in the country, right? So I think a lot more industry engagement together needs to be held. I think that's my point of view. Yeah.
All right. And I believe, that is all the time we have, ladies and gentlemen. And also please give a big, round of applause virtually, of course, to our esteemed panelists for their contribution to this topic. Yosini, the partner and executive director for KPMG Management and Risk Consulting. Stephen White, the director of sales engineering APAC for Precisely. And last but not least, Munira Khairuddin, the chief executive officer for Principal Asset Management. And also thank you for taking the time to join us on day one of the SCxSC Fintech Conference 2021. Tomorrow, it is day 2 of the SCxSC Fintech Conference, and kicking things off is the rise of embedded finance, the perspective and challenges at 9:15 a.m. So this will be a great session to hear our distinguished industry players who are going to be sharing their thoughts and experiences on embedded finance, which honestly has been everywhere, right? From shopping apps to food delivery. And at 10:30 a.m., if you're exploring the potential of pivoting to ensure that businesses are moving in the right direction, acting faster and more effectively to stay resilient in times like this, then do join our Pivoting to Thrive. It's creating value from data session. That's happening at 10:30 in the morning. All that and obviously a lot more happening tomorrow, and you can find out more information on the website, which is scxse.my. My name is Jeff Sandu, and it's been a pleasure to be connected with all of you here. And until next time, and on behalf of SC, stay safe. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again to Sydney, Stephen, and Munira. It's been a great pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.